Why was Jesus transfigured with Elijah and Moses? That's what we're going to talk about today in Matthew 17. Hi everyone, this is Jill from the Northwoods, going through the Bible, one slow roll at a time. So last time we talked about how we heard Peter was going to be a stone in this massive rock of the church, and it's going to be built on a firm foundation. We're starting to see this starting to gel, not just with the disciples, but the church itself, how the church is going to be structured. And today we're going to talk about transfiguration. So this is 6 days after, it says, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, the three of them, up to a high mountain. And there are 3 high mountains in this particular area. One of them's kind of low and doesn't have snow on it all year long. The other 2 are higher. And because of that, people feel that this transfiguration happened on a particular mountain. It said that he transfigured, which means that he changed appearance. He metamorphized. That's another big word that we can use here, but chose another image, it says. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And this talks about where we'll eventually get there in the New Testament, where there are robes that we get in heaven that are pure and white. And that's what this reminds me of. And he is standing next to Moses and Elijah. Peter's thrilled. Oh, it's good for us to be here. This is exciting. I mean, wouldn't you want to see this if you could see this? And so Peter, being impetuous again, says, let me build a tent. Now, remember that when Egypt and Exodus happened, they traveled with a tabernacle, which was a tent that could be moved around. And so he wants to build a tent because tents are not permanent places. He wants to take the show on the road. I wonder if he wants to show everyone how amazing this is. I think he wanted everyone to see this. And just like in the Old Testament, we're going to build you a tent tabernacle to do this. And then a voice said, just like when Jesus was baptized, although when Jesus was baptized, the only one who heard it was Jesus, this time they all heard it. And the voice said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." Jesus said it a bunch of times. If you have ears, hear. If you have eyes, see. And now God the Father is saying, listen to my Son. This is all about paying attention, not just hearing voices, not just letting it go in background noises, but pay attention. Listen. And now God the Father is saying it too. They fell down in fear. I'm sure this had to just be scary. Face down to the ground, terrified. And Jesus came to them and said, "Rise, have no fear." Jesus always is telling us not to fear. And many times in the Bible, he tells us not to fear. I think it's one of the most said things. I read a book by Max Lucado where he talks about this is one of the most said things that God says to us, fear not. So they came down to the mountain. And he told people, don't tell people about this vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Again, he says it again. I am going to be raised from the dead. So they shouldn't have been shocked when it happens. And so the disciples said, well, I thought Elijah was supposed to come first. Because remember, Elijah's going to announce when the Messiah is going to come. So why did we just see him now? If you're the Messiah, you already have come. Now we're seeing Elijah second. That's, I think, the bulk of the question here. It's confusing because, like I said, that's where the prophecy was going to be. They also, interestingly enough, did not say, hey, there's John the Baptist. So now we know John the Baptist was not a reincarnation or an image of Elijah. Elijah, who, as far as we know, either he was never buried or he never died because God took him directly to heaven. Maybe he died and then God took him right there. We don't exactly know. But if Elijah was John the Baptist, they would have recognized him. And clearly this is a different person. And so Jesus says, you're right. Elijah is going to come and announce the storing of all things. But I'm telling you, he already came. But the people of the world didn't recognize him. The people just did what they wanted to. And John suffered at the hands of the people, as a prophet always suffers for their people in the end. Jesus is the Son of Man. He is going to suffer for his people. And then they realize that John the Baptist was their Elijah. It's not literally Elijah coming here and telling us about the Messiah. John the Baptist, again, representing an Old Testament prophet, telling him the Messiah is at hand, coming right now. And there he is. He is their Elijah. So, boy, that's, really great. So they get down to the bottom. We're going to hear more about this story in other Gospels. And a man comes up to Jesus and says that he has a boy who has been suffering with demons. And I brought him here, and your people said that they couldn't heal him, that it was impossible for them to heal. And Jesus says and calls them a faithless and twisted generation. How long am I going to be with you? The answer is not long at all. How long am I going to bear with you? Also, not long. So the boy is brought to him. He removes the demon from the boy. He's instantly healed. Again, probably not a possession. Probably this boy was persecuted by this demon. And then the disciples were like, well, why couldn't we do this? Why was it not for us to be able to do? And he says, because you don't have faith. If you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you would be able to move mountains. Nothing would be impossible to you. Because you couldn't do this, because of your faith, it makes me think back to Peter walking on water, that he was doing great, and then the instant the world came upon him, he started to fall into the waves. Sometimes I think that this kid maybe was so messed up, this demon was so hard, they looked at the waves around them and decided they couldn't take care of him, and therefore their lack of faith caused it so that they weren't able to take care of him. But Jesus also gives this opportunity to point out, I'm your power source, I'm the greater for you, but you should have more faith. And then he talks about how he's going to be handed over to men, who's going to kill him, and on the third day he's going to be raised. And this bugged them. It said that they were worrying, they were distressed about this. When it came to it actually happening, it's interesting because they didn't even recognize that it was happening. I don't know why that was. So they get back to Capernaum, and this is where Jesus had set up his area. And then the collector of the temple tax, so there was Roman tax, there were temple tax, came up and went to Peter and says, hey, does your teacher pay taxes? And Peter's like, yeah, our teacher pays taxes. So they went over to his house, probably not his house, but the house he was staying at, and asked Jesus about it. And he says this very interesting thing. When you have kings here on earth, do their children pay taxes? Does Herod's son pay taxes to Herod? No, they don't. So then why should I pay a temple tax? Because that is a tax going to my father, and I'm his son. But you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to pay it anyway. So he tells his disciples, go cast your hooks into the sea, and the first fish you pull out of there will have money for the tax. People don't believe this was Peter's tax, and this is what gives the idea that Peter was probably a young guy. Maybe all the apostles were young guys, because you had to be 20 years old to pay taxes. So they didn't go to Peter and say, hey, where's your taxes, Peter? They went to Jesus and said, where are your temple taxes? So it gives us a little bit of a hint. Again, things we'll ask when we get to heaven. They got the fish, they paid the tax, and that was the end of it. Well, there you go. And that ends chapter 17. I believe that this particular chapter was about 2 years into the ministry of Jesus. The other question comes in. Why was it Moses and Elijah that was there to stand with Jesus? Moses was a lawgiver. I think this becomes more apparent as you get into the writings of Paul. But Moses gave the law, the rules you have to pay attention to. And so Jesus comes as a Moses figure, one, to rescue his people from sin, but also to complete the law that Moses initiated. Elijah was a prophet that was really after God's heart. He faced danger. He praised God. He did everything a prophet could do. And in celebration, as I mentioned before, Elijah ended up going directly to heaven. He wasn't buried. God brought him directly up. Interestingly enough, too, Moses was also, no one's ever found his grave because it says God buried him in secret. So in the end of both these two men, God took care of them because they were so faithful. They have parallels in the Jewish faith. Interesting side point about why these two men, the law and the prophets, two men dedicated to loving God and doing what he said. My meditation this week is going to be about how so many times God gives us facts, in the fact that Jesus is telling them about his death and resurrection, and we just don't believe it. God will say, I'm doing these things. This is what I'm going to do. And we just don't believe it. We have to take more careful consideration of what he said, that the faith of a mustard seed can move mountains. When you have faith, you can do many things you cannot believe you can do. And there are times where we saw Peter having it and times when Peter didn't have it. I'm going to meditate a little bit more on how we can have that kind of faith. And what I'm going to pray about is the fact that I don't have that distress, that I keep that faith, because I know that I can do amazing things and go beyond my own abilities when I have faith in God. And what I'm going to share with others is the fact that Jesus said many times, fear not, don't be afraid. He does not want us afraid. He wants us to have that faith that prevents us from being afraid and allows us to do amazing miracles. Why couldn't they heal that boy? Because they didn't have faith. He wants us to be able to do miraculous things with his faith. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you listening to this video. Please remember to subscribe and tell a friend. Email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com if you want to say something private, or leave a comment here in the chat channel. I've been having some interesting thought about maybe at times having a live session where we talk about the book. I also have the podcast, which started a year ago, and right now we're in Ephesians. But if you would be interested in live sessions where we talk about the Bible or talk about what we've read so far, or maybe your own views, let me know. Like I said, put in the comments, drop an email to me. I'd love to hear if you would like some live sessions where we could talk about the Bible together. Thanks so much. Have a great day.